Thank you.
So, in Tabi saying it's such an interesting question, simply because the life of an investor is based on the amount of risk that an investor is willing to take versus the return that the investor anticipates making. So, is it safe? Is it a good idea? The questions are actually very different to each other. So, is it a good idea? Well, it's a great idea if one is able to extract value out of it. And if the return for the risk that you're putting in is high enough, then absolutely it's a brilliant idea. And that's spending money on a property before you become owner of a property. Now, is it safe? Now, safety is a funny one, because what is safe? Safe is basically a combination of all the facts and measures that a person puts in place to try and ensure that they're safeguarded, or that they mitigate their risk as much as possible, so that the damage that they potentially foresee is avoided, right? Now, as in simple terms, let's forget an investor. In simple terms, is it safe to contribute cash towards a property or the improvement of a property before transfer has taken place? So, off the cuff, rule of thumb, no, it's not safe. So you already know that you're on the one side of the fence with that be very, very careful. There's definitely positive action that you need to take to make it safe, because by its very nature, it is unsafe. Now, the question that follows up on that is, okay, but now what is the positive action that I can actually take to safeguard the money that I invest in a property? Now, there's many ways of doing this, and I don't think we're going to have time in a short session to go through it. But the reality is, in some deals, there's value in trying to improve deals. So I'll give you an example. If a person buys with the intention of rezoning and wanting to resell or flip later, the holding period, so the period within which the person holds this property in their name, costs them money. So the sooner you can begin to do the renovations to attend to the rezoning, the more money you are going to save. So again, calculate how much are you willing to put in versus how much could you stand to lose. So that's one example. Another example, for instance, is a buyer that wants to buy a property but can't necessarily afford to take transfer, or does not want to take transfer, but instead negotiates with the seller that the seller retain ownership of the property, allows them, the investor, to invest in improving the property, and later sells it and shares the profits with the seller. So instead of paying a purchase price and keeping all the profits yourself, you maybe defer the payment of the purchase price and share a bit of the profits with the seller. So those are very two common examples, especially in developments that I find nowadays, where a person begins spending money on a property which they don't own. So again, how do you safeguard this? Well, for starters, the contract's important. So there has to be an understanding, if a person spends the money, under what circumstances can the person who did not spend the money, the seller as an example, the property owner, under what circumstances can they back out of this agreement? Do they have any entitlement to cancel the agreement? Can they withdraw? Can they give notice? And if they do so, how would they pay this money back? Is there some kind of security? So this is as an example, this is when we can have conversations over registering a mortgage bond for the value of the money that you're putting in order to secure it against the property, so that if anything does go wrong, you can simply foreclose on the property and collect your money back. But that's not always possible, because sometimes there's already bonds over these properties. So sometimes we have conversations, especially with installment sale agreements, because people normally buy it over long periods of time and they want to start doing improvements on the property. So installment sale agreements are a great way to secure your purchase of the asset, because ultimately what can go wrong is that the seller changes their mind, But then you go to court and you force the seller to sell to you. It's not a difficult process. Or the seller goes insolvent. And normally, if the seller goes insolvent, it becomes a challenge to force the liquidator to adhere to a contract. The liquidator can sometimes choose not to adhere to a contract. But with installment sale agreements, as an example, the liquidator must give you the opportunity to pay the full balance of the purchase price and then must give you transfer of the property. So it's a nice backup plan. So it's a nice safeguard. So there's many safeguards. You can have family members sign as sureties. You can have family members sign as guarantors. There's many different safeguarding provisions that you can incorporate into a deal in order to mitigate the risk that you'll suffer as an investor by putting money into a deal and potentially the deal not going through. Now, the level of security you put in is normally equivalent to the amount of money that you put in and what the value of that money is for you. So I know many developers, as an example, that will do this across 50 properties because they don't mind spending 200,000 Rand on rezoning. So for them, it's not a big spend. And if one out of the 50 properties falls through, you know what, they'll sue, but it's not their life savings. But if this is your only deal and this is your only money and you're putting in 500,000 Rand to improve this property and this is it, you're counting on this for your income, then be very, very careful. Make sure that you advance security measures to protect this as much as possible to make sure, A, you either get the money back if something goes wrong, or B, you can force the sale of the property into your name if something goes wrong.